gray dress landed on Lena's bed without a word. Diana did not knock. She never knocked. She walked into rooms the way she walked through life, as if every space already belonged to her, and everyone inside it was simply furniture she had not gotten around to removing yet. She dropped the folded bundle of dull gray fabric onto the bedspread, smoothed the front of her own silk blouse, and said, "You will wear this on Friday. You will arrive through the east entrance with the kitchen staff. You will not speak unless someone addresses you directly, and even then, keep it brief." Lena stood by the window. Outside, the garden was full of lanterns being strung between the oak trees, their paper shades glowing soft gold and white against the late afternoon sky. Festival workers moved in careful lines below, laying out tables, arranging flower arrangements, testing the lighting rigs. The Moon Festival was 3 days away, and the Voss estate was already transforming itself into something beautiful. Lena had grown up watching that garden transform for this exact event every year. She knew the way the lanterns swayed when the evening wind came off the hills. She knew how the music started low and grew by midnight, drifting up through her open bedroom window when she was a child, and she would press her face against the glass and watch the dancers below. Her mother used to lift her onto the windowsill and hold her steady, pointing out the constellations and telling her stories about the old pack traditions, about the Moon Festival and what it meant for their bloodline, about the night her parents had first danced together at this very gathering 20 years before. Her mother had been gone for 6 years now. The gray dress on the bed was not a dress. It was a message. "The east entrance," Lena repeated. Her voice was steady. She had learned, over these 2 years, to keep her voice steady. Diana was already moving toward the door. "The catering company will brief you on your duties at 5 o'clock Thursday. Be on time. I will not have you embarrassing this family." Lena turned from the window. "This is my family." Diana paused at the threshold. She did not turn around. The pause lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was the amount of time Diana needed to construct whatever she said next into something that sounded reasonable and landed like a stone. "Your father's family," she said. "Which is also my family now, which means I decide how this household presents itself at the most important social event of the year, and the way this household presents itself does not include you wandering through the main grounds drawing attention to yourself." She finally turned, and her expression was smooth and pleasant, the way a lake looks smooth when you cannot see what is underneath. "You understand, I hope." She left without waiting for an answer. Lena stood very still for a long moment. Then she looked at the gray dress on her bed. Then she looked back at the garden, where the lanterns were still being hung, where the same oak trees she had climbed as a child stood with their arms stretched wide, where her mother's roses still grew along the south wall because no one had thought to remove them, or perhaps no one had dared. She picked up the gray dress, folded it carefully, and set it on the chair by her desk. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands. Her hands were her mother's hands. Everyone who had known Eleanor Voss said so. The same long fingers, the same slight curve to the thumb, the same faint shimmer at the wrist when the light caught it at a certain angle, a shimmer that had no ordinary explanation, and that Diana had noticed on the second day of moving into this house and had said nothing about ever since. Lena pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. 3 days. She had survived 2 years. She could survive 3 more days. The morning her mother died, Lena had been 11 years old and sitting in the kitchen eating toast. Her father, Owen Voss, had come downstairs with his shirt half-buttoned and his face the color of old paper, and he had sat down across from her at the kitchen table and said nothing for a very long time. Then he had said, "She's gone, sweetheart." Just those 3 words. No explanation, no softening. Just the words, hanging in the air between them like something that had been dropped and could not be picked back up. Lena had not cried right away. She had finished her toast. She did not know why. Something inside her had gone very quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the electricity cuts out, when all the small background hums and whirs of normal life simply stop, and you realize for the first time how loud everything always was. Her father had cried. He had pressed his hand over his face and made a sound she had never heard from him before and has not heard since. She had gotten up from her chair, walked around the table, and put her arms around him the way her mother used to do, and she had held him there in the kitchen while the toast grew cold. She had been taking care of him in one way or another ever since. For 4 years it had been just the 2 of them in this house, her and her father, navigating the enormous quiet that Eleanor Voss had left behind. Owen threw himself into his work. He was the beta of the Voss pack, second only to the alpha, and his responsibilities were constant and consuming. Lena went to school, came home, did her homework at the kitchen table, cooked simple dinners because the housekeeper only came 3 days a week, and waited for her father to come home. Most nights he was late. Some nights he did not come home at all. She learned to leave a plate covered on the counter and go to bed. She did not blame him. She understood grief well enough to know it wore different faces on different people, and her father's face of grief was absence, was motion, was filling every waking hour with something other than the space where Eleanor used to be. She understood it. That did not mean she did not feel it. Then, 2 years ago, Owen Voss had brought Diana Carr home for dinner. She was elegant. That was the first word Lena had thought, standing at the bottom of the staircase watching this woman walk through their front door. Diana was tall and composed with dark hair cut bluntly at the jaw and eyes the color of river water, and she moved as if she had rehearsed every motion in advance. She shook Lena's hand, not hugged her, shook it, like a business introduction, and smiled a smile that touched only the lower half of her face. Her daughter Cora was 2 years older than Lena at 18, and she stood in the entrance hall looking at the house the way a person looks at a hotel room, checking what was provided, calculating what was missing. Owen had been nervous at dinner in a way Lena had not seen him nervous before. He kept refilling water glasses that did not need refilling and asking questions before the previous answers were finished. Diana answered everything smoothly. Cora ate her food quietly and watched Lena from across the table with an expression of mild, unconcerned evaluation. By the end of the year, Diana and Owen were married. The wedding had been small. Diana had arranged everything. Lena had been given a pale blue dress to wear and had stood in the third row and watched her father smile at this woman who was not her mother, smiling the smile of a man who had decided that surviving meant starting over. And she had told herself this was fine. She had told herself people needed other people. She had told herself her mother would have wanted him to be happy. She had mostly believed herself. What she had not anticipated, what no reasonable person could have anticipated, was how quickly the house changed. It did not happen in dramatic gestures. It happened in small ones. The kitchen was reorganized, and Lena could no longer find anything. Her mother's reading chair was moved from the sitting room to a back storage room because it clashed with the new color palette. A photograph of Eleanor that had lived on the mantelpiece for years disappeared one Thursday and was replaced by a decorative vase, and when Lena asked her father about it, he said he was not sure where it had gotten to, and then changed the subject. Lena found the photograph in the attic, wrapped in newspaper, set neatly in a box as if it had been packed for moving. She brought it back downstairs and put it in her own room. Cora took the bedroom next to Lena's and filled it with her things quickly and completely, marking territory with the efficient thoroughness of someone who had done this before. She was not openly unpleasant. She was something more unsettling than that. She was indifferent. She looked through Lena the way you look through a window, acknowledging the glass only when you need to open it. Diana was the opposite. Diana paid close attention to Lena. She simply did so in the way a person pays attention to a problem they have not yet decided how to handle. The invitations to the household's social functions stopped including Lena's name. When she mentioned it, Diana expressed mild surprise, said it must have been an oversight, promised it would not happen again, and then it happened again. Packed council meetings that her mother had always attended with Lena beside her, teaching her the protocols, explaining the significance of each decision. Lena was no longer brought. Her father signed the permission forms for her school events without reading them, handed to him by Diana at breakfast with the morning newspaper, and he trusted Diana's summary of what they were, because he did not have time to look closely. He did not look closely at much anymore. That was the thing that hurt most. Not Diana's careful erasure, though that was its own particular ache. Not Cora's indifference, though that was lonely in its own way. It was Owen Voss, standing across rooms, looking everywhere except directly at his daughter, as if direct eye contact might require him to account for something he was not ready to account for. Lena did not confront him. She had tried, in the early months, to say things gently, to mention this or that specific thing that had happened, to ask if he had noticed. He would listen with his forehead creased and his eyes troubled, and then he would say he would speak to Diana and then he would not, or he would speak to her, and whatever he said produced no change whatsoever, and then the subject would be quietly set aside and they would both pretend they had addressed it. She had stopped trying about 8 months ago. Instead, she had made a different kind of peace. Not a surrender, a decision. She would not become small. She would not make herself easy to forget. She would stay present, stay visible, do her work in this house and in her studies, and in the handful of pack activities Diana had not yet managed to edge her out of, and she would wait, not with bitterness. Bitterness was too exhausting to maintain, and it fogged your thinking, but with patience. Her mother had told her once that patience was not passive. Patience was active. It was choosing, every single day, to hold your ground without making a scene, to keep your dignity without announcing it, to trust that the truth of a thing eventually found its way to the surface, no matter how many layers were piled on top of it. Water, Eleanor had said, crouching beside Lena in the garden, showing her the way water worked its way through packed soil toward the light. Water does not argue with dirt. It simply keeps moving. Lena kept moving. She kept the house neat, because she liked order. She cooked when she felt like cooking. She studied with the same focus she had always brought to her schoolwork. She tended her mother's roses along the south wall because no one had told her not to, and she suspected the reason no one had told her not to was that Diana understood, on some level, that the roses were the one thing she could not take without revealing herself completely. Friday was 3 days away. Lena looked at the gray dress on the chair. She thought about the east entrance, where the kitchen deliveries came through, where the catering staff would be gathering before dawn to set up for the evening. She thought about standing behind a serving table while the pack gathered on the grounds where she had run as a child, where her mother had danced, where her bloodline, her real bloodline, the one her mother had explained quietly and carefully and told her never to speak about in front of strangers, entitled her to stand. She went to her closet. In the very back, behind her winter coat and a box of old notebooks, wrapped in a cloth bag her mother had sewn from silver blue fabric, was a dress. It had been Eleanor's. She had worn it at the last moon festival she attended, 2 months before she became ill, and Lena had been allowed to stay up late and watch her mother come downstairs in it, and she had thought her mother was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The dress was ivory with silver thread worked into the hem and sleeves. It fit Lena now as if it had always been made for her. She unwrapped it. She held it up to the light. 3 days. She put it back. She would think about what came next. But she would not be made small. She would not walk through the east entrance in a gray kitchen uniform while her stepsister wore the dress Lena had spent 2 days altering by hand at Diana's request, her own hands, her own labor, Cora's benefit, and stood in the place that should have been Lena's. She would not. The decision sat in her chest like a warm coal, quiet but certain. Outside, the lanterns went on swaying in the oak trees, indifferent and lovely, and the garden waited for Friday the way it had always waited, the way it had waited when her mother was alive and when she was not, patient and rooted and impossible to move. Lena pressed her palm flat against the window pane and watched the light change. She was still here, unscheduled, uninvited, unseen by everyone who was supposed to see her. Still here. That would have to be enough. For now. The memory came without warning, the way they always did, not as something she chose to think about but as something that simply arrived, slipping under the door of her concentration the way cold air slips under a door in winter. She had been 9 years old, sitting on the edge of her parents' bed watching her mother get ready for the moon festival. Eleanor Voss was at the vanity, pinning up her hair, and the ivory dress with silver thread was already on, the same dress that lived in Lena's closet now, and the whole room smelled of the powder her mother used, something faint and clean, like pages and rainfall. Why does the festival matter so much? Lena had asked. She was swinging her feet, which did not reach the floor. It is just a party. Her mother had met her eyes in the mirror. Eleanor had the kind of eyes that looked like they were always thinking about something interesting. Warm and dark and deep. She smiled. It is not just a party. It is the night the pack stands together under the moon and remembers who it is. It is the night the old promises are renewed. And for our bloodline, she had paused, touching the silver thread at her wrist. It is the night we are most visible, most real. The silver carries the old markings, Lena. The pack knows what it means, even the ones who have forgotten. On that night, no one can look at us and pretend we are ordinary. 9-year-old Lena had looked at her mother's wrist. She had held up her own. The same shimmer, the same faint silver light. And me? And you, Eleanor said. Especially you. You carry more of it than I do. Be patient with it. It will matter at exactly the right time. Lena's hand dropped from the window. Be patient with it. She breathed in, breathed out. The lantern swayed. The garden waited. Friday was coming whether she was ready for it or not, and she had a feeling, the same feeling she had learned to pay attention to, the one that had never once been wrong, that Friday was going to matter in a way no one standing in this house right now was prepared for. Not even her. She went downstairs to start dinner, passing Diana in the hallway without a word, moving through her own house with the quiet, unshakable certainty of water finding its way through packed earth. She kept moving. She always kept moving. There was a scratch on the dining room table that had not been there 6 months ago. Lena noticed it every morning at breakfast and every evening at dinner. It was a small scratch, diagonal, about 2 inches long, just to the left of where Owen Voss sat at the head of the table. She did not know how it had gotten there. She had never said anything about it. She simply noticed it. the way she noticed most things in this house, quietly, without announcement, cataloging the small changes the way you catalog weather. This morning was 2 days before the Moon Festival, and the house had reached a particular pitch of pre-event tension that made everything feel slightly too loud even when no one was speaking. Cora was at the table already, scrolling through something on her phone, a half-finished cup of tea cooling in front of her. Diana was standing at the counter reading through a clipboard of notes the festival coordinator had sent over. Owen had not come down yet. Lena set a plate of toast on the table, poured herself coffee, and sat in her usual chair at the side. Not the head, not the foot, the side. Her mother had sat there too, and it was the only chair in this room that still felt straightforwardly like hers. The coordinator confirmed the centerpiece delivery for tomorrow morning, Diana said, not looking up. Cora, your fitting is at 11. The seamstress is coming here. I thought the alterations were already done, Cora said, turning a page. She wants to do a final check. The neckline needed adjusting. Diana made a small note on the clipboard. You were right to mention it. Lena drank her coffee. She had done those alterations. She had sat up until after 11 on Tuesday night in the spare room with a needle and thread, adjusting that neckline, taking in the sides, rehemming the bottom by 2 centimeters because Cora had worn heels to the fitting, and the proportions had been wrong. She had done it because Diana had asked in that particular tone she used, the smooth, pleasant tone that was not actually a request, and she had done it without complaint because complaining cost more than it gained. She had not expected a thank you. She had not received one. Cora glanced up from her phone and looked at Lena, the way she sometimes looked at her, as if just checking that Lena was still there and had not dissolved. You should eat more than toast, she said. It was not unkind. It was not kind either. It was the same quality of observation she might direct at the weather. I'm not very hungry, Lena said. You are always not very hungry. Lena looked at her stepsister steadily. Cora held the gaze for a moment, then went back to her phone. There was something in Cora that was not entirely without conscience. Lena had perceived it occasionally over these 2 years, a flicker of something uncomfortable behind her eyes at certain moments, as if she saw things she preferred not to look at directly. She never acted on it, but it was there. Owen came downstairs at 8:30, tie not yet done up, carrying his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, reading something on the screen. He sat at the head of the table, poured himself coffee, ate a piece of toast without looking up from his phone. Morning, he said, to the table in general. Good morning, Diana said efficiently. The coordinator wants a final walkthrough at 4. Can you be back by then? I will try. He scrolled. The council meeting might run late. I need you there, Owen. The layout of the blessing ground still needs your approval as beta. I know, I will try. This was how they talked. Practical, brisk, competent. They ran the household the way her father ran pack business, with efficiency and minimal friction. Diana was extremely good at managing Owen Voss. She understood what he needed, which was to have things handled, to be presented with decisions that had already been structured and simply required his agreement. He was not a bad man. He was an absent one, and Diana had very expertly arranged things so that his absence never felt disruptive. The cost of that arrangement was not paid by Owen or Diana. Lena looked at the scratch on the table, diagonal, 2 inches long, just to the left of her father's coffee cup. She had been the one who found her mother's favorite book still on the nightstand 4 years after her death, because no one had moved it, and Lena had eventually, quietly, moved it to the shelf in her own room where it still lived. She had been the one who remembered Eleanor's birthday, which fell in April, and who put fresh flowers from the south wall garden on the kitchen windowsill every year on that day without comment. She had been the one who knew, because her mother had told her, that the Voss bloodline carried something specific and old that manifested in silver, at the wrists, at the temples, in the light of the full moon on festival nights. Something that the pack's oldest traditions recognized as rare and significant. Something Diana had understood instinctively, and had spent 2 years making sure no one had occasion to look at too closely. Because if they looked closely, they would see what Lena carried. And if they saw what Lena carried, the careful architecture Diana had built would require revision. Lena did not fully understand all the implications yet. Her mother had begun to explain, and then there had not been enough time. But she understood enough. She understood that it mattered. She understood that it was hers. And she understood that the gray dress and the east entrance were not about etiquette or family presentation. They were about making sure that on the one night when the pack's oldest eyes would be open and looking for exactly what Lena carried, Lena would be standing behind a table in a kitchen uniform where no one would look. She drank the rest of her coffee. Her father set his phone down, finally, and looked around the table. His eyes landed on Lena and moved on. the way a flashlight moves on, looking for something specific and registering only what it did not need. Then they moved back. He looked at her for a slightly longer moment. "You look tired," he said. His voice was not unkind. Owen Voss was not an unkind man. He was simply not paying enough attention to know that he was allowing unkind things to happen. "I am fine," Lena said. "Are you sleeping?" "Yes." He looked at her one more second. Something moved in his face. Some small, brief, internal motion. And then it passed, and he reached for his phone again and was gone, back into the distance he maintained, as carefully as some men maintained their gardens. "The florist said the white peonies arrived," Diana said. "Good. I want them on the main tables, not the side arrangements." The conversation moved on without Lena in it. She finished her toast. She rinsed her cup in the sink. She went upstairs past the empty space on the landing wall where a family portrait had hung before Diana redecorated, past the closed door of what had been her mother's reading room and was now Diana's home office, past the photograph of Eleanor that lived only in her own room now, behind her own door, seen only by her. She sat at her desk, opened her book, read the same paragraph 4 times before it stuck. The silver at her wrists caught the morning light, faint as a whisper, real as bone. 2 days. She thought of her mother's voice. Be patient with it. It will matter at exactly the right time. She turned the page. She kept moving. The festival was coming, and something in her, something older than her anger and quieter than her grief, knew with absolute certainty that this year was different. This year, everything was different. She just did not know yet how. The day before the festival, Lena did 5 things. She reread the 3 pages of notes her mother had written in the back of her journal about the Moon Festival ceremony, specifically the section about the blessing ritual, the part about who stood where and why, and what it meant. She mended a tear in the ivory dress so small it required a magnifying glass to see, because it was her mother's, and it deserved care. She walked the south wall garden for half an hour in the late afternoon, and deadheaded the roses, which had needed it for a week. The roses were cream and deep pink, and one climber along the eastern section that bloomed in a red so dark it looked black in low light. Eleanor had planted them the year Lena was born. They smelled the way good things always smell, quietly and without trying. She ironed the gray kitchen uniform and hung it on the back of her chair with great care, as if she intended to wear it. And she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time before she went to sleep, studying the shimmer at her wrists, the way it moved when she turned her hands in the light, the way it seemed to answer the light rather than simply reflect it, as if something inside it was awake and paying attention. Be patient, she told herself. She turned off the lamp. Outside, the oak trees were full of lanterns, and the garden was silent and ready, and the moon rose wide and white over the Voss estate the way it had risen every year for as long as anyone could remember, over everyone who had stood in that garden with something to lose or something to claim. Tomorrow, Lena thought. Tomorrow. She closed her eyes. She slept without dreaming. And the moon kept watch over the roses, over the empty spaces on the walls, over the gray dress on the chair and the ivory dress in the closet, over the whole quietly aching house, keeping watch the way the old things always do, patient and full of light, waiting for the moment when everything that has been held under finally rises. The morning of the Moon Festival arrived with cold light through thin curtains and the smell of coffee, and Diana's voice already moving through the house, directing, organizing, containing. Lena lay still for 60 seconds after she woke. It was something she had learned to do in the past year. Give herself 60 seconds of quiet before the day began, before she had to be the version of herself that moved through this house without complaint. Just 60 seconds of being entirely herself, in the dark, with no one watching. Then she got up. Diana had hired an additional housekeeper for the day. 2 men from the catering company arrived at 8 to begin setup in the kitchen. Cora's seamstress came at 10 and spent 90 minutes in Cora's room with the door closed. Diana received the florist, the lighting technician, the festival coordinator, and a man from the pack council all before noon, moving between them with the polished competence of someone who had been managing events like this her entire life. Lena stayed out of the way. She helped where she was asked. She carried boxes. She answered the door twice when both Diana and the housekeeper were occupied. She ate lunch alone at the kitchen counter while the catering staff worked around her. When the coordinator approached her about the serving schedule, she said she would be there at 5 as arranged, and the coordinator nodded without looking at her face. At 3 o'clock, Diana called everyone into the main sitting room. It was not unusual. There was often a pre-event briefing of some kind, a last round of instructions, a confirmation of the evening's timeline. Lena sat on the small chair near the door. Cora was on the sofa. Owen had come home early, which itself was notable, and he stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets and his jacket already on. Diana stood at the center of the room with her clipboard and her river water eyes and began working through the evening schedule. Who would greet the Alpha King when he arrived? Where the pack elders would be positioned? What order the blessing ceremony would proceed in? Who would stand where during which segment? Lena listened. She had read her mother's notes. She knew the ceremony protocols perhaps better than anyone in this room. She listened to Diana walk through them and noted, quietly, the moments where Diana's version diverged from the old traditions. Not drastically, not in ways anyone unaware of the older protocols would catch, but the divergences were there, and they were specific. The most significant was this. Diana said that Cora would stand in the ceremony circle as the pack's presented daughter. The presented daughter, the old term for the highest-ranked unmated young woman of a significant bloodline, the one who stood beside the Alpha during the blessing. It was Lena's place. Not because she wanted it particularly, not because she had planned to fight for it, but because the bloodline that determined it, the silver bloodline her mother had described, the one that ran in Lena's wrists and nowhere in Cora's, was not transferable and not replaceable, and any elder who had been paying attention for more than a decade would know it. Diana finished her briefing. She looked around the room. "Lena," she said, not unkindly. "Precisely. You will need to leave for the east entrance by 4:30. The catering coordinator expects you before 5. The room went still, in the small way rooms go still when something beneath the surface of a conversation shows itself briefly before being covered back up. Owen looked at the floor. Cora looked at the window. Lena looked at Diana. "I understand," she said. Diana nodded and moved on. Lena stood up quietly and walked out of the sitting room and up the stairs and into her bedroom and closed the door. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at the gray dress on the chair. She looked at the closet door where the ivory dress lived. She sat very still for a long time. Then she did something she had not allowed herself in quite a while. She cried. Not dramatically. Quietly, with her hands flat on her knees, the way she did most things that cost her something. Without announcement, without performance, in private and in full. When she was done, she washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and made the decision she had been circling for 3 days. She would not wear the gray dress. She opened the closet. She lifted the ivory dress from its cloth bag and held it against the last of the afternoon light coming through the window. The silver thread caught it instantly, alive, responsive, almost warm in a way that had nothing to do with the sunlight. Lena put on the dress her mother had worn at the last moon festival Eleanor Voss had attended. She did her hair the way her mother had shown her, the pins she had saved, the simple style that Eleanor said let the silver come through at the temples without looking like you were showing off. She put on the earrings that had come down to her through her mother's family, small and quiet, as unassuming as everything else her mother had taught her. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked like Eleanor. She looked like herself. She picked up her small evening bag and walked out of her room, down the stairs, and through the front door, past Diana's coordinator who was standing in the entrance hall and who looked up, and then did a visible second take, and then said nothing, because he did not know what to say, and out into the evening where the oak trees were full of lanterns and the Voss estate grounds were filling with pack members dressed in their best, and the moon was already rising white and enormous over the hills to the east. She walked through the main gate. She walked onto the festival grounds. Her mother's dress caught the lantern light, and the silver thread answered back, and Lena Voss, who had been invisible in her own home for 2 years, walked into the moon festival as if she had every right in the world. Because she did. The festival grounds in full preparation were a different world from the quiet garden Lena walked past every morning. The oak trees had been transformed entirely. Their branches carried hundreds of round paper lanterns in cream and gold and soft white, and beneath them the grass was covered in long tables spread with linen, silver candlesticks, flower arrangements built tall and full of white peonies and trailing ivy. Musicians were setting up on the east platform, string instruments quietly, the occasional note floating up and then gone. Pack members were arriving in small groups, dressed formally, the kind of formal that the Moon Festival required. Not the restrained formality of business dinners, but something older, something that remembered when this gathering was the most significant night of the pack's year. People turned when Lena crossed the main threshold, not all of them, but several. She recognized it. She had seen it happen when her mother walked into rooms, that small involuntary noticing that the eye does when it perceives something it has been trained by centuries of instinct to register. The silver thread at her wrists and hem caught the ambient light of 100 lanterns and did what it always did in moonlight. It answered. She kept her pace steady. She did not look for Diana. She did not look for Cora. She made her way through the gathering crowd toward the south end of the grounds where she knew the Elder Council traditionally positioned itself in the hour before the ceremony, and she moved the way her mother had moved in her memory, unhurried, upright, as if she had all evening and nowhere particular to be and also exactly where she was supposed to be at the same time. She had been on these grounds fewer than 30 seconds when she heard Diana's voice. It came from somewhere to her left, sharp beneath its pleasantness. "Lena!" She turned. Diana was standing with two women from the Pack Council, both of them in the middle of a conversation that had apparently been interrupted by Lena's appearance. Diana's expression was the one she used in public, composed, warm, with nothing visible underneath it except someone in complete control of her surroundings. But her eyes were doing something different from her expression, and Lena saw it, had learned to see it, understood exactly what the slight tension at the corner of those river water eyes meant. "I thought the coordinator was expecting you at 5, Diana said, pleasantly. "It is 5 now," Lena said. One of the council women looked between them. She was older, silver-haired herself, natural, earned, and she was looking at Lena with an expression that was not quite recognition, but was definitely something more than polite curiosity. "What a lovely dress," the older councilwoman said. Her name was Margaret Hale, and she had been on the Pack Council since before Lena was born. She was looking at the silver thread at Lena's hem. Her voice had shifted slightly, the way voices do when something has moved from the conversational to the significant. "That is Eleanor's dress." It was not a question. "Yes," Lena said. "You are Eleanor's daughter." Also not a question. Margaret Hale looked at Lena's wrists with the direct, assessing attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Yes," Lena said. Diana said something smooth and redirecting about the ceremony timeline, something about positions and schedule, and the evening running long if they did not all make their way to their places soon. Lena let her talk. She kept her attention on Margaret Hale, who was still looking at her, not at Diana, with something in her expression that had settled from curiosity into something quieter and more resolved. "You should come find me before the ceremony begins," Margaret said to Lena, in the way of someone who means it and is not interested in whether Diana finds it convenient. "There are things your mother would have wanted you to know, and I have been waiting for the appropriate moment to tell you." Diana said, "Margaret, I am sure we can arrange a time after the evening." "Before the ceremony," Margaret said pleasantly, to Lena, as if Diana had not spoken. "East End, near the Elder Oak, within the hour." She smiled at Diana. Then she turned and walked away with her companion. Diana looked at Lena. Lena looked back. The two things that were always underneath Diana's surface, the calculation and the specific fear she carried about Lena's bloodline, were visible now. Just for a moment, stripped of their careful covering by the last 90 seconds of what had just happened. Then they were gone again, smoothed back under. "I hope you understand," Diana said quietly now, outside the hearing of the people nearby, "that tonight of all nights is not a moment for drawing attention to yourself in ways that are unhelpful for this family." "My mother wore this dress to this festival," Lena said. "I think she would find it appropriate." Diana held her gaze. Then she said, "Your father has a position to maintain." "I know," Lena said. "I have watched him maintain it from a great distance for 2 years." Something moved across Diana's face, gone before it could be named. She nodded once, not in agreement, but in the way of someone who has registered a new variable and filed it away for later, and turned smoothly toward another group of arriving guests. Lena stood alone in the middle of the festival grounds in her mother's dress, and let out one slow, quiet breath. Then she moved toward the east end of the grounds, to find Margaret Hale. Margaret was already there, standing beneath the elder oak, the oldest tree on the estate, massive and gnarled and older than the house itself, draped tonight with more lanterns than any other tree, its bark dark and its branches enormous and calm against the deep blue of the early evening sky. She handed Lena a small cup of warm spiced cider from a nearby table as she arrived, as if she had expected Lena at exactly this moment. Perhaps she had. "I knew your mother since she was your age," Margaret said. She did not bother with the kind of conversational approach that eases into difficult subjects. She was a woman who had been holding important information for what she considered too long and was done with delay. "We grew up in the same household, briefly. I know everything about the silver bloodline that Eleanor carried, because Eleanor told me, and because I carry a lesser version of it myself, as all the oldest Pack families do to some degree. What you carry is not lesser." Lena held the warm cup in both hands and listened. "Your bloodline is the strongest presentation of the silver I have seen in 30 years. Eleanor knew it. She told me, in the last months of her illness, that she was concerned about what would happen to you if she was not there to guide you. She asked me to watch over you. You never spoke to me, Lena said, not accusatory, simply true. Your father remarried quickly. The new situation made direct contact complicated without creating a confrontation that might have harmed your position further. Margaret looked at her steadily. I kept my distance and I watched. I should have acted sooner. That is the truth of it, and I am sorry for that. Lena looked at her. The Moon Festival ceremony, Margaret continued, has a specific place for the bearer of the silver bloodline. You know this from your mother's notes, I think, or you would not be standing here in that dress. She called it the presented daughter, Lena said. Yes, and in our oldest traditions, the presented daughter stands beside the alpha during the blessing. It is not ceremonial. It is functional. The silver carries the blessing the way a conductor carries current. Without it, the ceremony is ritual. With it, it is something else. Something old and real. Margaret glanced toward the main grounds where the crowd was gathering. Tonight, Diana Carr intends your stepsister to stand in that place. I know. Cora does not carry the silver. I know that too. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. What do you intend to do about it? Lena thought of the gray dress on the chair. She thought of the east entrance. She thought of her mother's voice, the wait of 60 seconds in the dark before the day begins, the roses growing untrimmed along the south wall because no one with enough nerve had cut them down. She thought of Margaret Hale saying she was sorry for waiting too long. I intend, Lena said, to be here, to stay visible. I do not have a plan beyond that. Margaret studied her for a moment. Then something in her face shifted, a small approval, the kind that comes from recognizing something you understand deeply. That is precisely what Eleanor would have said. The musicians on the east platform began to play properly, the full opening melody of the Moon Festival gathering, and the crowd turned toward the main ceremonial ground in the easy drift of people who know the shape of a beloved tradition. Margaret touched Lena's elbow once, lightly. The Alpha King arrives in approximately 40 minutes. Stay visible. Stay near the center of the grounds. Let the dress do what it was made to do. She walked away. Lena stood under the elder oak and looked up through its branches at the sky. The moon was fully risen now, white and enormously bright, pouring its light down through the leaves, catching the silver thread at her wrists and hem the way she had always known it would. The way Eleanor had always said it would. Cold and brilliant and unmistakable. Something that had been held very still inside her for a very long time moved. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just moved. She walked toward the gathering. She stayed visible. She let the dress do what it was made to do. And 40 minutes later, without warning or ceremony, a car pulled through the estate gates, and the night changed. The Alpha King arrived without announcement. That was the first thing Lena noticed. No herald, no formal introduction over the sound system, no deliberate pause at the entrance to allow the gathered pack to register his arrival. He simply came. A black car, 2 vehicles behind it, pulling through the main gates and stopping near the greeting pavilion, and then he was there, stepping out into the festival light, and the energy of the grounds changed the way the air changes before a storm. That specific shift of pressure and attention that every instinct reads before the mind catches up. Lena was standing near the central fountain when it happened. She registered the shift before she turned to look, the way you register weather changes, not through a single sense but through all of them at once. When she did turn, she had a clear view across the grounds. His name was Caden Rowe, and he was the youngest Alpha King the Pack territories had seen in living memory. 30 years old. Had taken the position at 27 after 3 years of unrest between the northern and southern packs that most of the elders had been convinced would end badly for everyone involved. It had not ended badly. It had ended with Caden Rowe. She knew these things from her mother's journals, from Margaret Hale's conversation under the elder oak, from the conversations she had listened to in this house over 2 years, the ones in which she was not included, but which she heard nonetheless because she was quiet and present, and people forget you are listening when they have decided you do not count. He was tall. He moved without performance, which was itself a kind of performance in a gathering where almost everyone was performing something. His second walked slightly behind him, a careful, watchful presence, and the pack elders moved toward him in the way iron filings move toward a magnet, not in a rush, but with an inevitability that revealed how much they had been tracking his location since before he arrived. He shook hands. He spoke. His expression was calm in a way that was not closed, not the composure of someone suppressing something, but the composure of someone who was simply present, simply himself, without the layer of social performance most people wore at events like this. Cora had positioned herself strategically, Lena could see her across the grounds, standing with Diana near the greeting pavilion, their timing calculated to put them in Caden Rowe's direct line of approach. Cora was in the white dress, the one Lena had altered, and she was beautiful in it. She stood well. She smiled at the right moments. She had her mother's poise and her mother's eye for a room. Caden looked at her briefly, then past her. His gaze moved across the grounds with the particular quality of someone taking genuine inventory, not cataloging who was important, but simply seeing what was actually there. Most people at events like this looked for who they expected. He seemed to be looking for whatever was actually present, the two being different things. His eyes moved across the fountain. Stopped. Lena was standing still. She had not positioned herself strategically. She was not performing anything. She was simply standing near the fountain in her mother's dress with the moonlight doing what it did, and she was watching him the way she watched most things, directly, without pretension, with the patient attention of someone who has learned that looking clearly is one of the few advantages available to people who have been made invisible. They were perhaps 40 meters apart. He had arrived 20 seconds ago. The pack elders were converging on him from 3 directions, and Diana was already beginning a smooth, practiced approach from the pavilion. And he was looking at Lena. Not the way people sometimes look at her and then look away. Not the glance and file of social inventory. He was looking at her with the specific, deliberate attention of someone who has noticed something they do not intend to stop noticing. She did not look away. Neither did he. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds before the first pack elder reached him, and the moment broke. Not ended, not dismissed, just interrupted. He turned to greet the elder with the courtesy and focus he seemed to bring to everything, and Lena breathed in slowly and looked at the fountain and wondered what had just happened in the same way you wonder about the feeling of a door opening in a room where you had not heard a knock. Diana reached his side. She was brilliant at this, the approach, the introduction, the way she positioned Cora naturally into the conversation without making it look deliberate. Lena watched from across the grounds. She could see Diana's mouth moving, the graceful gesture toward Cora, the small laugh that made everyone around her relax. Caden listened. He responded. He was courteous and warm and entirely present. And twice in the next 10 minutes, across the length of the festival grounds, he looked at Lena. She did not move toward him. She had no intention of moving toward him. She was not here for that. She was here because she had a right to be here, because Margaret Hale had told her to stay visible, because her mother's dress was doing what it was made to do, and because something in her that was older than her anger and calmer than her longing had decided that she would not spend another moon festival behind a serving table, while her own birthright was handed to someone who had not earned it and did not carry it. She moved through the crowd steadily. She spoke to people she recognized from the few pack functions she still attended. She was introduced twice by other elders who remembered her mother, who looked at her dress and her wrists with the same quiet attentiveness that Margaret had shown, the recognition of people who know what they are looking at. She got a glass of water and stood near the south end of the grounds where the ceremony space was being prepared, the low stone platform where the old blessing had been performed every year, ringed with white candles, the pack's ceremonial insignia carved into the stone and worn by centuries of repetition. She knew this platform. She had stood on it as a very small child, held in her mother's arms during the ceremony, feeling the silver at Eleanor's wrists warm against her own skin. She felt a presence stop beside her. She turned. Caden Rowe was standing 2 feet away. No second, no elders, no Diana. He was looking at the ceremony platform with the expression of someone who has done his research on a place before arriving in it. Then he turned to look at her. Up close, she understood better what she had sensed from 40 meters. He was not performing anything. He was simply looking at her the way she looked at most things, clearly, directly, without pretension or social decoration, as if he had decided to see what was actually there. "That is the ceremony platform," he said. His voice was lower than she expected, even and unhurried. "Yes," she said. "You know how it works." Not a question. He had watched her stand here and understood that she did. "I grew up watching it," she said, "and my mother explained it to me. The silver bearer stands to the left of the alpha during the blessing. The placement is specific. The blessing carries through the silver and into the ground beneath the stone, and through the stone into the pack's connection to the territory." He looked at her steadily. "And who is the silver bearer?" Lena held his gaze. "The person who carries the bloodline." A pause. "I see several people here tonight in dressed silver," he said, carefully. "The detail work on the tablecloths, a number of accessories, your stepmother's necklace, which was pointed out to me when I arrived." "Decorative silver does not answer the moon," Lena said. She held up her wrist. The lantern light and the full moon between them caught the silver in her skin, and it did not reflect the light. It met it, that faint warm response that was nothing like metal, and nothing like ordinary shimmer, and everything like what it was, alive and old, and entirely specific to blood. Caden looked at her wrist for a moment, then at her face. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lena Voss," she said. "Eleanor Voss was my mother." Something settled in his expression, the small click of a piece fitting correctly into a shape that had been waiting for it. He looked at her for another moment, and she could see him thinking, working something through, not slowly but thoroughly. "I was told," he said, "that the presented daughter this year would be a young woman named Cora." Lena said nothing. He looked at the platform again, then back at her. "I was also told this is a bloodline position." "It is," she said. "And Eleanor Voss's daughter carries the bloodline." "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. He was not angry. He was something more concerning than angry. He was precise, and he was paying full attention, and he was understanding exactly what had been arranged for this evening and by whom. "Lena," he said, as if he were simply establishing the name properly, "will you stay near the ceremony platform? I would like to speak with Margaret Hale before the ceremony begins, and then I would like to find you again." She looked at him. She had spent 2 years being overlooked. She had spent 2 years being organized into corners and back entrances and gray uniforms. She had spent 2 years watching the distance between her father and herself grow wide enough that neither of them could see the other's face clearly. She was not naive. She did not know this man. She did not understand what the next hour would bring. She did not have a plan. She had only herself, in her mother's dress, in her mother's garden, in the light of the same moon her mother had loved, carrying what her mother had given her. "I am not going anywhere," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he gave a small nod, not formal, not ceremonial, but the nod of one person acknowledging another person clearly and without reduction, and moved through the crowd toward the elder section of the grounds where Margaret Hale was standing. Lena turned back to the ceremony platform. The candles had been lit, the moon was directly overhead. The silver in her skin warmed the way it always did at full moon, a gentle, familiar warmth she had carried her whole life, the warmth of being what you are without apology. She stood still. She waited. Not with dread, not with the braced spine patience of someone enduring something, with the simple, steady, open readiness of someone who knows the right moment is coming, and has decided to be fully present when it arrives. Across the grounds, she could see Diana watching her. She could see the calculation in Diana's stillness, the rapid rethinking of the evening's arrangements. She could see Cora standing slightly to Diana's left, watching with that expression she wore when she was seeing something she preferred not to look at directly, but could not quite look away from. She could see her father arriving through the main gate with his tie done up now, late from the council meeting, scanning the grounds. She let her gaze rest on Owen Voss for just a moment. He was looking for Diana. He was looking for Cora. He was orienting himself the way he always oriented himself, toward the people he had built his current life around, the landscape he understood. Then his gaze crossed the ceremony platform. Stopped. He saw the dress before he registered who was wearing it. She could tell. She saw it in the brief, struck quality of his expression, the way a person's face opens when something reaches past the present moment and touches something older. He knew that dress. He had seen it 100 times on the woman he had loved longest, the woman whose absence had broken him in ways he had never learned to carry gracefully. Then he registered the face. His daughter, Eleanor's daughter, standing in Eleanor's dress on the ground where Eleanor had stood, in the light of the same moon. Something moved across Owen Voss's face that Lena had not seen there in 2 years. She looked away before she could feel too much about it. She looked at the ceremony platform. She breathed in, breathed out. The musicians shifted into the opening notes of the blessing ceremony's traditional prelude, and the crowd began to move toward the stone in the old, unhurried way of people responding to a sound they have been shaped by for generations. The ceremony was beginning. Lena stood beside the platform. She waited for Caden Rowe. The prelude lasted 8 minutes. Lena had counted it once when she was small, 8 minutes of the old melody, giving everyone time to gather at the ceremony ground, to settle, to shift from the social into the ceremonial, to remember why they had come. She watched the crowd move and organize itself around the stone platform the way water organizes around a stone in a stream, the natural gravity of tradition pulling everyone into their places without direction or announcement. Diana moved toward the ceremony platform from the west side, Cora just behind her. Lena saw the moment Diana registered that Lena was already standing beside the stone, A very small adjustment in Diana's stride, barely perceptible unless you were practiced at reading her. And then she continued forward, arriving on the opposite side of the platform, positioning Cora to Diana's right, which placed her approximately where the presented daughter was traditionally supposed to stand. The pack elders were gathering at the north end of the stone. Margaret Hale was among them, and as she took her place she looked across at Lena with an expression of simple, settled attention, not reassurance, not warning, just the calm regard of someone who knows how things stand and is prepared for whatever comes next. The prelude ended. The silence that followed had weight. The Moon Festival silence always did, the particular quality of 200 people listening to the same thing at the same moment, which was the absence of everything ordinary. Then Caden Rowe walked to the ceremony platform. He came from the east side, from the direction of the Elder Oak, and he walked the way he had walked all evening, directly, without performance, as if he had simply decided to go somewhere and was going there. His second stayed at the edge of the gathered crowd. The pack council parted to give him access to the stone. He stepped up onto the platform. He looked at the gathered pack for a moment. He looked at the moon. Then he looked at the two sides of the platform. To his right, Diana, calm and beautiful and entirely composed, with Cora positioned exactly where the presented daughter would stand, in the white dress with the neckline Lena had altered, her expression open and hopeful and genuine in the way of someone who had been told she was wanted here. To his left, Lena, in Eleanor's dress, standing beside the stone with her hands loose at her sides, and the silver in her skin doing what it did in full moonlight, answering the light, specific and undeniable. The silence extended. Diana said something, soft, addressed to Caden, a quiet direction, the smooth guidance of someone managing a situation that was not going the way she had arranged. Her voice was low enough that the gathered pack could not hear the content, only the tone. Caden listened. His expression did not change. Then he turned to the left. He stepped toward Lena. The silence of the crowd was a living thing now, the specific suspended silence of people watching something they understand is significant, but are still absorbing. It had the quality of a long-held breath, not shock, but attention. The full attention of a pack that had been taught from childhood to read the ceremony and knew, every elder among them knew, exactly what it meant when the Alpha King walked toward the silver. Lena did not move. She did not step forward to meet him, did not perform eagerness. She simply stayed where she was, which was where she was supposed to be. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her by the fountain, with the direct, undistracted attention of someone who had decided to see what was actually there. Then he said her name, not the presented daughter, not her family name, her name, Lena. And then he said the rest of it, the part that made Margaret Hale close her eyes briefly in what looked like relief, that made the nearest elder take in a short breath, that made Owen Voss, standing at the edge of the crowd in his late-arrived suit, go absolutely still. He said her full name, not Lena Voss, the stepmother's household, the serving staff, the girl behind the table. He said, Lena Voss, daughter of Eleanor Voss of the Silver bloodline, and he used the old form of address, the form recorded in the pack's founding documents, the form that had not been spoken publicly in this pack in 11 years, because the last person to whom it applied had been Eleanor herself. He held out his hand. Lena looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She saw what was there. Not rescue, not performance, not a gesture made for the crowd's benefit. She saw the recognition that had been building since he first looked at her across the fountain. The recognition of someone who had done his research, who had spoken to Margaret Hale, who had looked at her wrist and understood what he was seeing, who had made a simple and specific decision about what the old forms required, and was simply doing it. She placed her hand in his. His grip was steady and warm. He turned toward the ceremony stone, still holding her hand, and led her up onto the platform. She stood at his left. The right position. The position in the old documents. The position Eleanor had stood in, once, at a moon festival before Lena was born, when Owen Voss had danced with her afterward, and told her she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. The gathering was still, 200 people holding the same breath. Diana Carr stood on the west side of the ceremony ground with her clipboard and her river water eyes, and her face showing nothing except the very specific, very controlled expression of a person who has watched something they built carefully come apart and has not yet decided how to respond. Cora stood beside her mother and said nothing, but she was not looking at Lena with hostility. She was looking at her with something closer to recognition, the uncomfortable recognition Lena had seen flicker in her stepsister's eyes before. The look of someone seeing something they had preferred not to look at directly, and finding that it was exactly what they suspected it was. Owen Voss stood at the edge of the gathered crowd in his late-arrived suit. He was looking at his daughter. Directly. At his daughter. With an expression that had gone past shock and past grief, into something rawer than either. Something that Lena did not have the margin right now to feel about. Something she would have to meet later, when there was space for it, when the ceremony was done. Caden looked out at the pack. He said, in the voice of someone accustomed to being heard without raising it, "We begin." And the ceremony began. The blessing moved through the ceremony the way it always had in the old form. 3 rounds of the traditional words, spoken first by the Alpha, then echoed by the pack elders, then received into the ground through the silver at the platform's center stone. Lena had read the ceremony in her mother's notes. She had it mostly by memory. She stood at Caden's left and she spoke the response words when they came, the old words in the old order, and she felt the silver at her wrists warm with each round in a way that had nothing to do with the air temperature. A specific purposeful warmth that she remembered feeling as a child in her mother's arms and had not felt since. It was real. Whatever else this night was or was not, whatever came next with her father, with Diana, with the careful reconstruction of everything that had been arranged for this evening and had not gone according to plan, this part was simply real. The words carried weight. The silver carried the blessing. The stone received it. She could feel it. She suspected that most of the people standing in the ceremony ground could feel it too, in whatever way they were capable of feeling it. The older pack members, the ones closest to the platform, had gone very still with the stillness of people who are feeling something true and do not want to disturb it. Even the children at the edges of the crowd had gone quiet in the way children go quiet when something beyond the reach of their vocabulary happens in front of them. The 3rd round ended. Silence. Then Caden said the closing words. The traditional closing that Lena had seen her mother say in her imagination 100 times. The words that sealed the blessing into the year. The territory holds. The pack holds. The line continues. The gathered pack answered. The line continues. And it was done. The silence released. People began to breathe again, and to move, and to speak in the low voices of people emerging from something that had been larger than an ordinary social event. The musicians on the east platform struck up the opening of the celebration music, lighter and warmer than the ceremony, the music that meant it was time to eat and drink and dance and be glad of the people around you. Caden turned to Lena. He had not let go of her hand during the ceremony. Now, on the platform, he released it. Not abruptly, but naturally, the way you release something when the moment that required the holding is complete. He looked at her with the same direct attention she had come to expect from him in the last hour. "Your mother was a significant figure in this pack's history," he said. "I know," Lena said. "You were not in the position you should have been in." "No," she said. "That has been corrected." He said it simply, not triumphantly. A statement of fact about what had just happened. There will be some administrative conversations with the council this week about the broader implications. Margaret Hale will be involved. He paused. "You should be involved as well." Lena looked at him. I did not do this for political reasons," she said. She wanted to be clear about that. "I came tonight because I had a right to be here. I wore this dress because it was my mother's and because I belong at this festival. I was not planning to." "I know," he said. He said it without interrupting, waiting until she had finished, and there was no impatience in it. "You did not plan this. I did." He looked at her with that settled, unhurried expression. "When I received the guest list for this evening and saw the name of the presented daughter, it did not match the name I expected. I spoke to Margaret Hale 3 days ago about the Voss bloodline." Lena stared at him. "You knew," she said. "I came prepared," he said. "The ceremony required the silver bearer. You are the silver bearer. That is not politics. It is the old form, and the old form matters." She held his gaze. She was trying to work out how she felt about this, whether it reduced what had happened, whether the knowledge that he had planned for it made it smaller or larger. She found, looking at his face, that it did not feel smaller. It felt like the word Margaret had used, standing under the elder oak. "Real." "Thank you," she said. "There is nothing to thank me for," he said. "You were where you were supposed to be. I did what the form required." Then, and this was the first time all evening that his composure had shown the edge of something more personal beneath it, he said, "But for what it is worth, you held the ceremony well." She breathed in. "My mother taught me," she said. He nodded. Then he stepped off the platform and went to speak to the council elders, and the crowd parted around him and reformed in his wake, and Lena stood alone on the ceremony stone for one more moment. She looked out at the grounds. at the lanterns in the oak trees, at the people moving back into the warm business of celebration, the festival resuming, carrying now the specific quality of a gathering that has shared something real and will go home changed by it, even if they could not say exactly how. She looked at Diana, standing with two councilwomen, speaking with a composure that was genuine and considerable, the composure of a woman who had lost a round she had played very well and was already deciding what came next. She looked at Cora, sitting at one of the long tables alone now, holding a glass of something and looking at the ground with the expression of someone who has arrived at a conclusion they did not particularly want to arrive at. And she looked at her father. Owen Voss was standing at the edge of the ceremony ground. He was not speaking to anyone. He was looking at her. He had been looking at her since Caden Rowe had said her full name and held out his hand, and he was still looking at her now, with his face open in a way she had not seen since she was a child, since the morning he had sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, "She's gone, sweetheart," and she had stood up and walked around the table and held him. He took one step toward her. Lena stepped off the platform. She did not go to him, not yet. She was not ready to go to him, and she was not going to pretend that she was, not tonight, not after 2 years. But she looked at him. She let herself look at him, and let him look at her, and in the space between them, across the lantern-lit grass, over the ceremony stone, under the white moon, something passed between them that had no name in the present tense. He looked like a man who was finally paying attention. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the south end of the grounds, toward the roses along the wall that were blooming dark and fragrant in the night air, toward the quiet. She sat on the low stone bench near the south wall that her mother had placed there 20 years ago. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at the roses, the cream ones and the deep pink ones and the one along the eastern section that bloomed so dark it was nearly black. They smelled the way good things always smell, quietly and without trying. She heard footsteps on the grass and looked up. It was Caden. He had a glass of water in each hand. He offered her one. She took it. He sat on the low wall beside the bench, not on the bench itself, not presuming that kind of closeness, just near. He looked at the roses. "Yours?" he asked. "My mother's," she said. "She planted them the year I was born, one for each month of the year. 12 roses." She looked at them. She said, "Roses remember what you plant them for." He looked at the climbing one along the eastern section, dark red in the moonlight. "What did she plant that one for?" he asked. "She never told me," Lena said. "I used to think it was something she was saving for when I was older." A long pause. "I am sorry," he said, "that she did not get more time. It was such a simple thing to say. Not a formality, not a condolence, just the plain acknowledgement of something true, said without trying to fix it or wrap it or make it more manageable than it was." Lena's throat tightened. She drank her water. She let the tightness pass. "What will happen now?" she asked. "With the council. With the arrangements at this house." "That is a longer conversation," he said. For a less public moment, he glanced toward the main grounds, where the celebration was continuing, where the music had shifted into something more festive, and the tables were filling, and children were beginning to run between adults' legs, the way children do when permission loosens. "What I can tell you now is that the bloodline position carries legal standing within pack law. What was done tonight was not symbolic. The council will understand that." "Diana will push back," Lena said. "I know." He was not concerned about this. "She is very capable. It will not matter." Lena looked at him. He was looking at the roses again, calm and present, and she could see that he was what he had appeared to be from across the fountain. Someone who was simply here, fully and without distraction, in whatever moment he occupied. "Why did you come find me just now?" she asked. "The celebration, the council." "I will speak to the council," he said. "There is time, there is always work." He paused. "I came because you were sitting here alone, and I thought you might want someone to sit with." Lena looked at him for a moment. It was such an ordinary thing to say. After an extraordinary hour, after the ceremony and the name and the held hand and everything it meant and everything it would set in motion, after 2 years of being arranged into invisible corners in her own home, after a mother 6 years gone and a father who had been more gone than present even while standing in the same rooms, after all of it, he came because she was sitting alone and thought she might want company. She looked back at the roses. "Yes," she said, "I did." They sat together in the quiet while the festival continued around them, the music and the voices and the light of 100 lanterns in the oak trees, and the moon moved in its old arc above, the same moon her mother had loved. enormous and white and full of whatever it was the old traditions knew the moon was full of, something real and old and not quite nameable. Lena's hands were in her lap. The silver at her wrists caught the moonlight and answered it, steady and specific, the warmth of being exactly what you are, which is the only warmth that never goes cold. She was still here. She had always been here. And for the first time in 2 years, someone with the authority to say it had stood in front of everyone and said so. Be patient with it, her mother had said. She had been. It had mattered at exactly the right time. The night moved around her like water, and she sat still in the middle of it, and it was not a small thing to sit still in the middle of something and know that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. It was not a small thing at all. The south wall roses bloomed dark and fragrant in the night air. 12 roses for 12 months. One still without a story, waiting for the right moment. She had always been patient with things that were worth waiting for. She was still learning to be patient with herself, but she was learning. And the moon held its watch, and the festival moved through its old shapes, and the Alpha King sat on the low stone wall beside her bench and said nothing in particular, and it was, for the first time in a very long time, enough. The morning after the moon festival came in pale and cool, the sky the soft gray of early light, before the sun commits to arriving. The lanterns were still in the oak trees, their paper dulled and dark now without fire inside them, swaying gently in a wind that carried the smell of dew and crushed grass, and the aftermath of celebration. Lena woke at 6. She lay still for her 60 seconds. Then she got up. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from its ordinary quiet. The difference was not about sound. It was about what had happened the night before, which still lived in the walls and the floors and the air, the way significant events always do. Not gone with the sleep, but waiting, patient, for the morning to find words for. She washed her face. She changed into ordinary clothes. She hung her mother's dress on its padded hanger and smoothed the silver-threaded hem carefully and put it back in its cloth bag in the closet, back in its place. Then she went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. The catering company had been thorough in their cleanup. Everything was back in order, the extra tables and chairs gone, the festival arrangement flowers already starting to close in the vases that had been left along the counter. Someone, probably the overnight staff, had left a pot of coffee on. Lena poured herself a cup and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden. The ceremony ground had been partially disassembled already. The stone platform was back to being just the stone platform, stripped of its candles and its circle of formal arrangement. The lanterns in the oak trees would come down today. She thought of standing on that platform. She thought of Caden Rowe's voice, saying her full name in the full form, daughter of Eleanor Voss of the Silver Bloodline, in front of 200 pack members, in front of the elders, in front of her father. She thought of her father's face. She heard footsteps on the stairs. They were Diana's footsteps. Lena knew them. 2 years of this house had given her a complete library of its sounds. Who walked how, at what hour, carrying what kind of intention in the pace and weight of each step. Diana's footsteps in the morning were usually purposeful, efficient, the steps of someone already thinking about the day ahead. These footsteps were measured in a different way, not hesitant, but careful. The steps of someone who was thinking about something specific. Diana came into the kitchen. She was dressed for the day already, not as formally as the evening before, but composed, put together. She poured herself coffee without speaking. She stood on the opposite side of the kitchen counter from Lena and looked at the same window and the same garden. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lena did not have anything to say first. She had not started anything. She had simply come downstairs and poured herself coffee and waited for the morning to arrange itself. She was good at that. The council notified your father at 8 o'clock last night, Diana said. Her voice was even. Not cold, not angry. Even. He received the formal notification regarding the bloodline position and its legal standing while we were still on the grounds. Lena looked at her coffee cup. There will be a formal review of the Pack household records, Diana continued. Margaret Hale has already filed the request. Apparently she filed it before the evening was over. A pause. The Alpha King signed it. Lena did not respond. I want you to understand, Diana said, that I did not intend for things to... She stopped. She started again. I made decisions about how this household should present itself at public events. I made those decisions in what I believed were the interests of this family. Lena looked up. She looked at Diana the way she had looked at her across the ceremony ground. Without anger, without particular softness, directly and clearly, the way you look at something when you have decided to see it as it is. You made decisions, Lena said, that required my presence and my labor, and then excluded me from any position or recognition. You arranged for me to serve dinner at a ceremony I had a bloodline right to participate in. You told arriving guests I was household staff. A pause. In front of pack council members. Diana looked at her. Those things happened, Lena said. I am not going to tell you they did not. No, Diana said after a moment. They did. Lena waited. Diana set her coffee cup down on the counter. She looked at it. She was not, Lena had always known, a simple person. She was not uncomplicated in the way that purely cruel people sometimes are. She was someone who had made a series of decisions that suited her purposes, and had not looked closely at their cost because looking closely at the cost would have required revising the purposes, and revising the purposes was harder than not looking. What are you going to do? Diana asked. Her voice was the same, measured even. But underneath it, something had shifted. The specific shift of someone who has spent 2 years holding a particular position, and felt it move last night, and is not yet sure how far it has moved. Lena considered. I am going to drink my coffee, she said. I am going to tend the roses. I am going to meet with Margaret Hale this afternoon, and I am going to attend whatever conversations the council requires. She looked at Diana steadily. And I am going to live in my house, in my bloodline position, in the way that was always mine to live in. I am not going to pretend the last 2 years did not happen, and I am not going to make them the whole story either. Diana was quiet for a long time. Cora was not aware of all of it, she said finally. Not the full extent, I want you to know that. I know, Lena said. I know, Cora. Another silence. She is not bad, Lena said. She is her mother's daughter, and she went along with what was arranged, and she did not look too closely because looking closely was uncomfortable. That is not nothing, but it is also not the same thing as what you did. She nodded once, the same small nod she had given last night at the festival, the nod of someone taking in a new variable, filing it, not agreeing but acknowledging. She picked up her coffee and left the kitchen. Her footsteps went back upstairs, measured and careful, the footsteps of someone with a great deal of thinking to do. Lena looked back out the window. The garden was brightening as the sun committed to arriving. The roses along the south wall were still blooming, cream and deep pink and one climbing dark red one that caught the early light and held it. A bird had landed on the elder oak's lowest branch and was looking down at the dismantled ceremony ground, with the unconcerned assessment of a creature that had not needed a ceremony to know the territory was still the territory. She heard different footsteps on the stairs, her father's. She had known they were coming. She had felt them in the particular quality of this morning's waiting. Not just Diana, not just the council notification, not just the formal review. Her father had been standing at the edge of the ceremony ground last night. He had been looking at her when the blessing ended. He had taken one step toward her and she had looked back and then turned away, and she had not seen him again for the rest of the evening. She had not been ready for him last night. She stood very still at the kitchen counter and waited to see if she was ready for him now. The footsteps paused outside the kitchen, a long pause. Then Owen Voss walked in. He looked like he had not slept well. His face had the particular quality of someone who has spent the night working through something that does not resolve itself neatly. His tie was not on. He was still in yesterday's shirt. He moved to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup with the focus of someone who needs something to do with his hands. Then he turned. He looked at his daughter. She looked back. There was a lot in the space between them. 2 years of careful avoidance and unconvinced excuses and plates left covered on the counter. 2 years of her finding her own way through this house that was also his house. The scratch on the dining room table. The photograph in the attic wrapped in newspaper. Eleanor's reading chair in the storage room. The birthday in April with flowers on the windowsill that he had probably not noticed. He put his hands around his coffee cup and looked at her. You wore her dress, he said. His voice was rough in the way of voices that have been through something in the night. Yes, Lena said. You looked. He stopped. He looked at the table. He looked back. You looked so much like her. Lena held his gaze. I know, she said. He pressed his mouth together. The thing moving in his face was too complex to name. Guilt and grief, and the specific anguish of a man who has understood something too late, and is just now beginning to account for what the lateness has cost. He was not a bad man. She had never thought he was a bad man. He was a man who had been broken by loss, and had put himself back together by looking away from the things that hurt, and the cost of that reconstruction had been his daughter. She did not say it to him. She did not need to. He knew it. She could see that he knew it. That last night had broken through whatever layer he had built between himself and the knowing was now fully present in his face. She waited for him to speak. He said, I have not been, and stopped. He said Diana, and stopped again. He looked at her with his hands around his coffee cup and his face open and raw, and she understood that he was trying to find the sentence that would cover what he had allowed to happen, and there was no such sentence. There was not a sentence in the language that covered it, and they both knew it. "I am your daughter," Lena said, quietly, simply, not as an accusation, as a fact, stated plainly, for the first time in 2 years, in a kitchen, on a cool gray morning while the festival came down in the garden outside. "I am Eleanor's daughter. I am not difficult to see. You just have to look." Owen Voss looked at her. He said, "I know." 2 words, the same 2 words in a way, as the first ones he had said after her mother died. Not enough, and the only ones he had, and she took them for what they were. She did not forgive him. Not this morning. Forgiveness was not something you could do in 60 seconds or in 2 words across a kitchen counter, and she was not going to pretend it was. But she did not shut the door either, and he saw that she did not, and something in his face shifted from anguish into something that was at least pointed in a better direction, the direction of someone who has been told the truth, and has chosen to receive it rather than dismiss it. He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup. He nodded again. Then he walked to the kitchen table, the table with the 2-inch diagonal scratch just to the left of his seat, and he sat down. Lena sat across from him. They sat together in the kitchen the way they had sat together in the kitchen when she was 11 and he had come down with his shirt half-buttoned, and she waited. "Margaret Hale called me this morning," he said. "Early, before I came downstairs." "I know she would," Lena said. "She told me things about your mother's bloodline that I did not." He stopped. "That I knew imperfectly. Eleanor told me, when we were first together, but I did not fully understand the significance and I did not." He rubbed his hand over his face. "I did not follow through on what I should have done when she was gone. There were protections I should have maintained. Records I should have ensured were preserved. I let those things slide and I did not. I did not watch closely enough." "No," Lena said. "I am sorry," he said. He said it the way he had said "she's gone, sweetheart." Plain, direct, without trying to make it more manageable. Just the words. Lena looked at the scratch on the table. "I need you to actually be here," she said. "Not sorry in this kitchen once and then back to the distance. Here, paying attention, watching." "Yes," he said. He said it like a commitment, like a man who had decided something in the night and was still deciding it, would keep deciding it, the way significant decisions require constant renewal to hold. A knock at the back door. Lena looked up. Through the kitchen window she could see a young man in a formal pack messenger's jacket standing outside the back door with a small sealed envelope. The pack seal on the front was the Alpha King's seal. She recognized it from the council documents her mother had kept. She got up and opened the door. The messenger held out the envelope. "For Lena Voss," he said, "from the Alpha's office, requested to deliver this morning." She took it. He nodded and left. She stood at the back door with the envelope in her hands. The morning air was cool on her face, carrying the smell of wet grass and something floral from the south wall. She came back to the table. She sat. She turned the envelope over. Her father was looking at it. He did not ask. He waited, the way she had waited, and it was the most attentive she had seen him in 2 years. She broke the seal and opened it. The letter was brief. 3 paragraphs, handwritten on formal paper, the handwriting even and clear. She read it. Then she read it again. It was not a declaration. It was not a romantic promise. It was something more precise and, in its precision, more significant. It was an invitation to a meeting with the Pack Council and the Alpha the following week, a formal restoration of the bloodline records, and a reinstatement of the Voss bloodline standing in the full Pack protocols. It listed, briefly and without drama, the specific rights and recognitions that attached to the Silver lineage, and had been allowed to lapse in the records over the last 2 years. At the bottom, below the formal language and the seal, in the same even handwriting, was a single additional line. "You were where you were supposed to be. I am glad you came." Lena read that line 3 times. She folded the letter. She set it on the table. She looked at her father. He was still looking at her, patient and present and working on it. Working on the paying attention, the being here, the watching. It was not going to be immediate. It was not going to be clean. 2 years did not clear in a morning. But he was trying. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at the garden through the window, where her mother's roses were fully open now in the morning light, all 12 of them. The cream and the deep pink, and the one that climbed the eastern wall in a red so dark it looked black in low light. She did not know yet what Eleanor had planted that one for. She thought she was beginning to understand. She stood up. She picked up the letter. She went to the door and looked back at her father. "I am going to tend the roses," she said, "and then I am going to meet with Margaret Hale." She held the letter at her side. "I will be back for lunch." Owen Voss looked at his daughter across the kitchen. "I will be here," he said. She believed him. Not completely, not yet, but enough for now. Enough for this morning. She opened the back door and walked out into the cool, clear light of the day after the moon festival, past the ceremony ground where the last of the dismantling was happening, past the elder oak where Margaret had handed her cider and told her what her mother had wanted her to know, and she walked to the south wall, where 12 roses grew along the stones that Eleanor had laid with her own hands the year Lena was born. She stood among them. She put her hands in the earth at the base of the nearest plant and felt the cool weight of it and did not think about anything in particular for a moment, just the soil and the smell and the morning and the light. Then she got to work. She pruned and deadheaded and checked the soil and did the slow, familiar work of tending, the work her mother had taught her, the work that required patience and attention and the willingness to do what needed doing without asking whether it would be noticed. It was always noticed, eventually. The silver at her wrists caught the morning light as she worked, quiet and warm, answering the sun the way it answered the moon, steadily, specifically, with the complete assurance of something that knows exactly what it is. She was still here. She would always be here. Unscheduled and uncontrollable and impossible to arrange into invisibility, the way her mother's roses grew uncontrollably along the south wall of the estate, demanding nothing, requiring only the ordinary sustenance of earth and light, flowering every year in colors that had no business being as vivid as they were. Cora came out of the house at 9:30. She came slowly, without her usual efficiency, and she stopped near the edge of the south garden and stood there with her hands in the pockets of her coat, watching Lena work. She did not speak for a long time. Lena kept working. She did not turn around. She gave Cora the space to find her own words, the way you give space to a person who is working through something and does not yet have the sentence. "I knew," Cora said finally. Lena's hands paused in the soil. "Not everything, not the full. I did not know about the bloodline standing, or the ceremony protocols, or, not all of it." A pause. "But I knew you were supposed to be at the festival, not behind a table. I knew that." Another pause. "I wore the dress you made. I stood where my mother positioned me. And I did not. I should have said something." Lena turned to look at her. Cora was standing with her arms crossed slightly against the cool air, not defensively, more the way you hold yourself when you are in the middle of being honest and it is uncomfortable. She looked younger this morning than she usually did, less composed, more real. Lena looked at her stepsister for a long moment. "Why didn't you?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. Cora looked at the roses. "Because it was easier not to. Because my mother had arranged everything, and it was organized, and saying something would have been..." She stopped. "It would have cost me something, and I chose not to pay it." The honesty of that landed cleanly. Lena looked at the dark red climbing rose along the eastern section, at its particular color in the morning light. "That is the truth," she said, "and it is more than most people manage." Cora looked at her. "I am not excusing it," Lena said. "I am just saying, it is the truth, and you told it, and that is not nothing." A silence. The kind that is not uncomfortable, but is still finding its shape. "My mother is making arrangements to leave," Cora said. "I think you should know. She has not said it outright, but she has been on the phone since early this morning, and I know her patterns. She is looking for somewhere else to take her next steps from." She paused. "She is very capable. She will be fine. She is always fine." "I know," Lena said. "I do not know what I am doing," Cora said. And this was the most unguarded thing she had ever said to Lena in 2 years of living in the same house. "I am not sure if I should, if there is something I should." She stopped, frustrated with herself. "You do not have to decide everything this morning," Lena said. Cora blinked. "You have time," Lena said. "The decisions are yours. What you want from this house, from this situation, from..." She gestured loosely between them. "From whatever this is, or could be. You have time to decide that." Cora looked at her, the same look from across the kitchen table the night before, from the ceremony ground, the recognition that was uncomfortable to hold, but she held it this time. "I would like," Cora said slowly, "to at least not be strangers, if that is possible." Lena looked at her for a moment. "That is possible," she said. Cora nodded. She uncrossed her arms. She looked at the roses as if seeing them properly for the first time, which perhaps she was. "My mother never liked this wall," she said. "She called it overgrown. She was right, Lena said. It is also exactly what it is supposed to be. Cora made a small sound, not quite a laugh, something honest and quiet, and more than she had offered before. She went back inside. Lena turned back to the roses. She kept working. The morning kept brightening around her, unhurried and certain, the way mornings do when they know they have all day. She finished the roses. She washed her hands at the outdoor tap. She picked up the letter from where she had set it on the bench, the low stone bench her mother had placed by the south wall 20 years ago, and she read the last line again, standing in the light. You were where you were supposed to be. I am glad you came. She folded it. She put it in her coat pocket. She walked through the garden, past the elder oak, past the ceremony stone, past the place where she had stood in ivory and silver thread with her hand in the hand of someone who had done his research and made a decision, and had used the old form in front of everyone, claiming not her but the truth of her, which amounted to the same thing. She walked through her house. She went up to her room. She took out her mother's journal and the 3 pages of notes about the Moon Festival ceremony, and she read them again. This time not for information, but for the feeling of the handwriting itself. Eleanor's long letters, her unhurried sentences, her margin notes that spiraled into thoughts she had not fully finished because she had been taken from her own story before she was done with it. Lena had always believed that the unfinished parts were still hers to finish. She set the journal down. She looked at her wrists. The silver, quiet in ordinary daylight, patient and specific and hers. There was a meeting next week. There were formal restorations and council conversations, and a great deal of the slow work of undoing what had been allowed to lapse. There was her father at the kitchen table, trying. There was Cora at the garden wall, beginning. There was everything that had not happened yet, which was most of it, which was the interesting part. She had learned patience from roses and from her mother's water-through-soil wisdom, and from 2 years of being invisible in a house she belonged to. She had learned that holding your ground without making noise was its own kind of strength, that surviving was not enough but was the beginning of everything else. She was 19 years old in her mother's bloodline and her own life, and the door she had been standing outside of for 2 years had finally, in the light of a full moon, in the old words spoken in the old form, been opened. She did not run through it. She walked. She picked up her coat and her bag and the letter in her pocket, and she went downstairs and out the front door. The front door, not the east entrance, and down the long drive and out the main gate. The morning was full and bright and cool. The town was beginning its ordinary day. People walked dogs and unlocked shop doors and drove past without knowing anything about Moon Festival ceremonies or silver bloodlines or the particular quality of a door opening in a room where no one had knocked. Lena walked down the main road toward Margaret Hale's house, which was 3 streets over and 2 blocks south, and she walked in the way her mother had walked, and in the way she had always walked when she was being most fully herself. Unhurried, upright, as if she had all morning and everywhere to go. She did. She had everything to go toward, and she walked toward it with the specific, unassuming certainty of someone who has spent a long time being what she is, and has finally stopped apologizing for it. The town moved around her. The day moved around her. And somewhere above the ordinary morning, above the rooftops and the oak trees not yet stripped of their festival lanterns, above all of it, the particular quality of light that follows a full moon sat in the air like the memory of something true, patient and warm, and fully present. Lena kept walking. She did not look back.